Hello and welcome to SSBC, the Nation Show program brought to you by me, Agwega Jing, live on SSBC. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Ambassador who has recently been appointed to represent South Sudan in the United Nations, New York, and this is a great time to talk to her and give us insight on what she's going to do to South Sudan. And Ambassador Cecilia, it's my great pleasure to have you today to talk to you on SSBC, the Nation Show program. First of all, I want to say congratulations for your appointment. The young nation need young people to participate and play a great role. Briefly, somebody outside there would like to know, who is Cecilia Adut Manyok? In detail, briefly.
Thank you for hosting me at the SSBC, our national television, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for the question. My name is Cecilia Adut Manyok. I'm one of the diplomats. Started my career in diplomacy back in 2007 when I was first appointed to work at our South Sudan mission to the United Nations, to the US at the time, when it was still Southern Sudan. So it was the Southern Sudan mission to the US under the leadership of Ambassador Ezekiel. This was our team leader, and also I was the SPLM representative secretary or assistant at the time as well, which was also being held by Ambassador Ezekiel. So this is when I started my career in foreign affairs, and at that time we were known as the Ministry of Regional Cooperation. During the movement days, a lot of the SPLM diasporans were actively working and supporting the South Sudan cause from whatever perspective we were at and from whatever little we were able to give. So we used to lobby for South Sudan cause. We used to attend meetings, do rallies in the US. And with the coming of late Dr. John, when they used to come to the US, we used to host them. At that time, I was in Nashville, Tennessee. So we used to host them and help support and drive some of the delegates and do some of the rallies and get the youth together to speak about the South Sudan cause. So this is how I started my work with the government of South Sudan. Also, I was the first Miss South Sudan in the US, something that a lot of people also don't know. And this was back in 2006. So becoming Miss South Sudan at the time gave me the platform to be able to speak loudly with the youth and about the youth, and to bring up youth issues when the SPLM meets or when the government of South Sudan at that time also meets. So this is a little bit about me.
Having had your appointment to represent South Sudan in the United Nations in New York, how do you perceive the news?
I was shocked and humbled at the same time, because first, for the young nation that we are, and for my age and my gender, I wasn't expecting that I'll be the one chosen to represent South Sudan at the United Nations. So I was first shocked. I took it in when I got the news. I sat with myself, and the second question I asked is, what will be that I've been given this docket? What does that mean? For me, I knew that going forward and from this day onward, I'll be judged. I'll be the one that will judge our generation and our gender. And that is a great task. Being a first at anything, it's always a challenge. So being the first female that's representing South Sudan at the United Nations, I'm really taking it with my all. I'm going in on behalf of the youth, I'm going in on behalf of the women, and I'm going in on behalf of the country itself. And it's an honor. It's an honor that I'm willing to give everything that I have to.
Well, that's nice, Ambassador. Now that you are representing South Sudan in the United Nations, what are your primary roles and responsibility that you are going to put into United Nations table about South Sudan?
My primary role at the United Nations will be to have the United Nations take South Sudan as a whole. The progress that South Sudan has made has to be given consideration. The challenges South Sudan are facing has to be given consideration, and the direction South Sudan is trying to take also needs to be given the attention it requires. And all of this nation building has never been easy for any nation. There's not a single nation that could come up and tell you we've done it and it was so easy. So within this, as South Sudan faces it, it's good for the international community to take South Sudan hand by hand and work with South Sudan. to accomplish its goal. South Sudan was a prosperous country. We are one of the fast growing nations in the world. We are one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and we are the most resilient citizens that we have in the world. And this is the energy I'm going to the UN with, that we have a cause, we have history, we have an obligation as a country, and we have hopes and dreams. And this is what South Sudan is coming with. So it's up to every nation that is willing to stand up with South Sudan and move forward with us. And for those who don't see it fit at the moment, they could also stand and watch South Sudan continue to progress.
South Sudan as a young nation is undergoing so many communal conflict and so many challenges. As a new ambassador that is going to represent South Sudan in the United Nations, how do you going to articulate these challenges to make sure that you bring the great image of South Sudan into the United Nations? Because I believe most of the time there are so many issues when it comes to bilateral relations between South Sudan and the UN. So many sanctions and so forth. So how do you plan to address this conflict and these challenges that the country is facing?
Communal conflicts are not something that's new to South Sudan. And the only reason why there seem to be a lot more today is, one, social media has came into play, and smartphones have came into play. So anybody with a smartphone and an account is able to air out these issues, and then the whole world sees it at the same time. And traditionally, there was a way in which we handle our communal affairs and our communal fights. So with these communal fights, our chiefs have always played a great role back in the days until today. They still hold that ground. What makes it difficult as well today is maybe also the weapons that have reached the hands of the citizens. And this is a crisis that the government is handling, and this is why they've been doing disarmament. And the disarmament will continue to reach the citizens of this country, to where now the responsibility of citizens is under the government of South Sudan and not individuals. So within all of these conflicts that continue to come out, it's South Sudan voice being heard of, we have these challenges, we are fighting them, we are working on them, and we are going to progress out of it. And with the communal fights that are happening throughout, also our citizens have a greater responsibility to play in this, for the simple fact that when you know that one of your leaders is doing something, or one of your citizens is doing something, you have the responsibility to stop it. Because as a nation, it's not going to help us, it's not going to move us anywhere, but cause us more heartache and heartbreaks. And with the issue of sanctions, they will always use anything that's negative in a country to make sure that this is what is being aired. And this is why the negativity in South Sudan is a lot less than the positive of South Sudan. And for this, we need to come up as citizens and air out that, because what you say about your country is what is perceived about your country. It's not the government that is going to change the image, it's us, the citizens, that will change the image of this country. And until we could portray that, even when we have differences, we could talk them out. Even when we have crisis, we could talk as citizens instead of referring to guns or machetes or even fighting by hands. So with the sanctions, we have made progress. Since the signing of the peace agreement, South Sudan has held its ground with the peace agreement, and it continue to hold the peace agreement. We have not had any fights, and this is a plus, because the country, the parties that have signed the peace agreement have committed to this peace agreement, and this is why it's still standing. So within the sanction, and the sanction committee will also take this into consideration.
Okay, I understand you have been to US so many times or so many years, and you understand the policy and also the relation of the US and the South Sudan. Now that you are in the top seat, and this is going to be an advantage of a country like South Sudan, to say ambassador is going to create more, diplomatic relations between South Sudan and the UN. How best are you going to strengthen this relation? Because I look at the level of diplomatic relations between South Sudan and the US, it's not to that level. So what plans do you have to put down to make sure that the US understand the positive side of the country and the negative side, as you mentioned? Because it seems like they have taken more negative than the positive one.
For the South Sudan and US relationship, we have an embassy in Washington that usually handle our bilaterals. in which they would do a lot of the groundwork when it comes to that. For us in the United Nations with the U.S. mission to the UN as well, most of our relationship comes in with dealing with resolutions. So if there's a resolution that the U.S. is putting forth, usually would stand with them as friends and as people who have helped us throughout. And within these resolutions, we're able to build our bilaterals moving on from there, because our interest is always the same of how to move the country forward, progress in democracy, progress in human rights, progress, all of these ideologies that South Sudan went to war for. And these are all ideologies that we're trying to identify with as a country. So our bilaterals within the U.S. mission and the South Sudan mission will continue. We're going to continue having talks and conversation and showing up and seeing what's the best way forward for us to fix or to elevate our bilateral relationship.
To advocate for South Sudan interests and promote a developmental agenda at United Nations.
For us at the United Nations and developmental projects, most of our work will come out from our country here. That being said, whatever projects that our peace program has, we'll push for it. Whatever quota South Sudan is supposed to get, like now we have the Summit of the Future coming up. Summit of the Future is focused on making sure each country gets to where we're trying to get to as a world in the near future. And within that is making sure that South Sudan quota reaches South Sudan. The same thing with the least development countries, there's also funding that comes out of that. So make sure that whatever funding is meant for South Sudan, it's coming out, and that these projects that South Sudan has in place are funded. So for us now, this year that is coming up, we have the end of our transition period and the elections that is supposed to follow by this. So most of our work now will focus on this, highlighting South Sudan's progress, highlighting South Sudan issues, highlighting South Sudan's need for help in whichever area. And these are the areas we're going to advocate for to make sure that we actually get the necessary.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dear viewers, let's go for a break. We'll come back and continue from there. Welcome back from that short break. You are still watching SSBC, coming to you live in Juba with me, Agwek Ajing, bringing you the Nation Show program. Of course, those who have just joined, I'm in the studio with Ambassador Cecilia Adut Manyok, a permanent representative of South Sudan to United Nations in New York, and she's celebrating the role she's putting on as a young person in United Nations, looking at the peace, security of the country, and the country is preparing for the election. Ambassador, welcome back from that short break. Ambassador, having heard from you and that you received the news of your appointment or assignment in the United Nations in New York as something that you never dream of, what can you tell other South Sudanese, let me say the gender, women like you, who don't believe that having got this position will be an open eye for young people and also for women in the government and also those who are trying to come up?
Like the mothers that have gone before us and who continue to serve ahead of us, they've laid a foundation and they've fought a hard fight for us to know that we can actually be present. Of course, being a woman, you have a lot more responsibility than usually discussed, and this is a world issue. Yes, as a woman, we know that you are going to get married. We know that you are going to have kids. We know that you're going to handle family responsibilities. We know you're going to handle your home affairs. But you go back to when you were a child. Your parents did everything they could to educate you. And when they educated you, is for this day, so that you could follow your passion. So all of your responsibilities continue, but you also pursue your passion. And that there's a start for everything. Like I said earlier, when I started school, by the time I finished my bachelor's, I finished back in 2006. I finished back in 2007. But in 2006, I was Miss South Sudan. So within this, a lot of the work I was doing was more of like, hosting South Sudanese events, getting the youth together, talking about South Sudan cause, why it's important for us to be involved in our communities, why it's important for us to be involved within the SPLM itself at that time, and why we should get together as a community. When I came to the South Sudan mission, I came with the same agenda on the back of my mind, that when our leaders said, I always injected in issues of the youth, because at that time I was one of the youngest people working at the South Sudan mission. So I continued injecting that in, and I started as the administrative assistant. It's fine. I was making the teas, I was preparing the breakfast, I was getting the lunches.
You didn't believe that one day you will...
No, I never thought that this is where I'm going to be today. So everything is through stages. So whatever stage you are given, it's meant for you to develop yourself and prepare for the next stage. When I left from that, I became an office manager in the office of the president. Also another big task, and that teaches you a different perspective of management, self-management, information management, and confidentiality management. You had to learn that, and I had to go through all of that. Going back to our mission, when I went to our embassy in Abu Dhabi, it was the same thing. I had an ambassador, and I had to report to them, and I was in charge of community affairs. So I did the same thing, of getting communities together, because a country is a country because of your community. The way your community stands is what identifies you as a country. So I continue within all of that. So now that I've been given this opportunity to be the head of mission, something I didn't dream of, but something that opens door for the next generation to come. Is that we will not stop here, we'll continue. Whatever assignment is given to you as a woman or as a youth, you do your part and know that you could do it, and know that you are able to do it and beyond whatever is needed from you. Because that energy, you use this energy for the betterment of your country.
If you could tell us what could be your thoughts on the current state of South Sudan in relations with the United Nations, and a personal feeling towards South Sudan in the upcoming post-election, what is your thought on that?
I love this country. South Sudan is naturally beautiful, has some of the nicest people I've ever met around the world. People that are resilient, people that are strong and responsible. You could see a small child and you could send them to the store, and they're able to go to the store and come back. And it also speaks to the safety of the country that we already have. So my love for this country always remains, and for its people is even higher. We're people that forgive so quickly and welcome everybody so quickly. When I see the nationalities that are walking out in South Sudan, I feel proud. When I was coming on the plane, coming here, I think the South Sudanese, we were about 7. If we're a lot, maybe we're 10. But the whole entire plane was full with international individuals, and even some with their kids that are coming in. So it's a feeling of the country that has a lot to offer the world, a country that could be the breadbasket of the world, a country that could be the most tourist destination in the world. So I see it as a beautiful country, and I see it as a country that is actually progressing. Coming 2025, South Sudan will not be recognized, because a lot of people now are holding back, not knowing what will be after the election. But I'm one of the people that is already past the election, and I'm already in the developmental aspect of South Sudan. So I see South Sudan as a country that's going to be so busy next year that we won't recognize it. For those of you, if you stay out for a month and you come back, I don't think you'll recognize South Sudan anymore. So that's where I am.
How do you engage South Sudanese who are living in diaspora so that they also take part in nation building?
One, as one of the South Sudanese who used to be a diasporan and who has migrated back into South Sudan, the South Sudanese in diaspora have always been willing and have an open hand to contribute to this country. I know a lot of them that have came back and continue in this country and are serving in various ministries and institutions here in the country. So for us in the U.S. and especially in New York City, there's not that many South Sudanese, but in New York State, there are some, especially in Syracuse and Buffalo. And the South Sudanese that we have there, usually their work comes in. If we have any delegation that comes in, they're also always ready to come and are always willing to serve in any capacity. We have some that volunteer as drivers. We have some that will volunteer in showing up to events and organizing functions so that our leaders could go and speak to them. So how do we organize them? What will be our role with them now is getting people back into programs. We have kids that have graduated and they want to come back into this country. So the question becomes, what programs can we put in place that will attract them coming back into the country and giving back? You could name any field and you will find a South Sudanese graduate in that field, anywhere between the US, China, Russia, Australia, Canada, here within Africa. So I think it's attracting them and keeping them. The South Sudanese community leaders, so whenever they hear there's a delegation, they would show up and support. But we don't have ongoing programs to how we are working with the mission itself. But within their states, they have programs that usually they do. They will do our Independence Day celebrations. They will do graduation ceremonies within the states, like all the South Sudanese that have graduated that year. They'll do functions for them, like high school graduates, college graduates, master's graduates, and PhD graduates. So this is the programs they usually do. And then they also do community events. Some communities that have so much money in their accounts, but it's how can they tap that into development here in South Sudan? So we'll have to liaison with our government to find a way that will fit in this investment that they've put into place.
How do you envision South Sudan's future in international community?
South Sudan has a great role to play in international peace and security. One, it's a country that really fought for so long to realize its self-determination. And this was driven by so much passion and drive from our forefathers who came before us. And throughout that whole processing, one thing was clear, and it was liberation of South Sudan, so that South Sudan becomes a country of its own. And now that we've reached this, we had to go through the negotiations with the Sudan at the time. And the negotiation process, it was our South Sudanese that did them. So South Sudan has experience in negotiations, has experience in mediation, and has experience in crisis management. And within this, when the international community comes, of course, as human nature, we could always find crisis. And this is where South Sudan could come in, to where they could always solve them.
In your opinion, or in your role as a permanent ambassador representing South Sudan in the United Nations, can you tell South Sudanese what are your top priority currently as you are resuming your office, and be able to articulate some of the challenges the country is going through?
Our top issue now, going into this year 2024, is the lifting of the arms embargo, the lifting of the individual sanctions, and the preparation for the general elections that are meant to take place at the end of the transition period. And the fourth is development funding, reaching the destinations within South Sudan. For the past, since the crisis broke out in 2013, we've been dealing with one leg of humanitarian assistance. But South Sudan is moving into developmental assistance. How do we develop this nation? So if you're able to develop and you're able to have projects that are running for the nation, because it's either peace or war. And to have peace, the youth have to be given something that they're doing. And this is where development comes in. If you get developmental funding and you're able to do developmental projects that are able to drive these young children and young youth to the job market, so they will not be used for the war within itself. So I focus a lot more on getting as much funding as I can into South Sudan for development, and also on the humanitarian assistance. It's about having sustainable humanitarian assistance. So if we are going to get humanitarian assistance, it would make sense that we are farming more, so that you help us this year, but next year we're able to farm. Because also with the environmental impact that we're facing, it's about bringing in technology that is able to help our people farm without having to lose everything that they're farming. Because the last 3-4 years we've been losing every harvest. Only one that's left, and I know that is being worked on. So these were the 5 benchmarks that they were holding the arms embargo on. And when it's completed, we should be able to get lifted from the arms embargo. The issue of the individual sanctions, these individuals were sanctioned
according to the roles in which they were doing. And at that time, most of these individuals now are not in those roles that they were claiming. That's number one. Number two, there's no evidence that linked them directly to these issues that they claimed that they were sanctioned for. So these are the things that we are going to try to highlight, the progress we've made and the peace we have held and the way we're trying to move forward. Because these also are our leaders, and within our leaders, we need them to be functional so they could help in developing this country instead of focusing on some of the individual sanctions that they're dealing with.
That's wonderful. I think we're almost coming to an end, but I don't want to leave this question out. I wanted to know from having received office like this, we must make sure that there is transparency and accountability. Talking about transparency and accountability, meaning how transparent in your office when it comes, or your role, example, when it comes to representing South Sudan in the United Nations.
Usually for the permanent representative, you have one is the resolutions that are talked about at the UN, and there are 6 committees. So usually the country will decide based on its bilateral relations with each country that is putting forth the resolution in order for us to vote on. And most of these votings are usually taking place from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And some of the hard decisions usually involves the president being involved in the decision making, and the foreign minister and the president will decide what will be the best way for South Sudan to vote. And then the mission is usually given directives on how to vote. So that's the line of the first line of work for us at the mission. The second part is negotiations of resolutions. So usually negotiations of resolutions will come in from within our government as well. So we work directly with directives from the capital here. Usually there's an African Union position already that is negotiated in Addis. Because usually as a bloc, you go as one bloc with some of these resolutions. So when you see us voting on certain issues, it's to do with votings already came clear from the UN, from the African Union to the UN, and this is how we are voting as African group within the UN. There are other votings that come from the capital directly based on our bilateral relations with the country that we're dealing with, so we vote according on that. And then, so that's one. On bilaterals, usually we sit there and we have the whole 192 followed by as 193 countries. So when we sit there, we're trying to make sure that we build bilateral relations that will translate into coming into South Sudan. So we have built bilateral relations with a country that is willing to invest in South Sudan. Then now once they come to South Sudan takes that place. So for us, we are agents, positive agents that represent South Sudan in a positive light.
South Sudanese, your last message in regards to your role, in regards to the beautiful South Sudan you have seen, in regards to positivity experiencing from South Sudan, and as you've been here for some time, and maybe what you need to learn from you and how they will also be interacting with you.
My message to the South Sudanese, I would say that you have a beautiful country. You have a beautiful country and you have a responsibility to protect it. Responsibility to protect it is what? We have 64 tribes in this country. And the beauty of those 64 tribes, when I see the Cholis dancing, when I see the Bari dancing, when I see the Jonglei community dancing, I take pride because at the UN, a lot of the countries have lost their heritage, but our heritage is still here. So when you see us practicing these, and I encourage them to be practiced because we should not lose our heritage. And one day, someday, people will come here and want to know how were you able to maintain your identity as the people of South Sudan. It's something that people will be paying to come and see. So please reserve this. It's not meant to be something that is supposed to divide us, but something that we're supposed to enjoy when we see it coming. And I really hope that we continue to practice positivity. If you have an issue with somebody, you take it up with that somebody. It doesn't involve the whole community. And when we do that, we're going to move forward in a better way. And the third is that keep educating yourself, keep practicing humbleness, keep practicing discipline, and keep practicing tolerance. Because until we're able to tolerate ourselves, nobody's going to come in and tell us to tolerate ourselves more than ourselves. So this is my message to us, and and I take pride in this country all day, every day. If you see me anywhere, I say, I'm a South Sudanese. They say, you South Sudanese? I say, no, this is not the South Sudan you know. The South Sudanese that I know are resilient.
Well, thank you, dear viewers. Lastly, we have come to the end of the program. Ambassador has been telling us more of her role, doing a lot for this great nation. And we hope to discuss more with her next time. Thank you.